All right, so in this video, we're going to create some terrain in Blender and we're going to send it on into Unreal Engine and Unity. It's going to be super quick and fast and not that hard. So we're going to go ahead and create a mesh, create a plane, go into edit mode. I'm going to just start subdividing this thing. It helps to subdivide this as much as you can because you're going to generate a height map and you need to try to match all the pixels that will be your height map. So I'm going to take it on up to a little bit higher than this. It's at 262,000 faces. And we're going to go to 1 million. Should be okay for now. I'm going to go into Sculpt Mode. I'm going to turn off the wireframe so my system stops struggling here. And we're going to just start with the clay strips here and turn tip brownness up a bit. So this is going to be a really quick sculpt. Nothing fancy here, just something to play with to demo how you do this. So start creating the idea of some terrain here. I have all the time in the world to create it super good looking, but something like this to get started. I'm going to turn this draw sharp to plus sign. So in my sculpting terrains video, I was kind of talking about how to create terrains. Creating terrains for games, you can do it a couple different ways. There's procedural ways. I'm going to turn the strength down. Procedural tools you can use like World Creator and Terragen and all kinds of other fun stuff. But there's also in editor tools that you can get. So I'm not sure about Unreal Engine, but I'm pretty sure there's some kind of plugin you can get off the asset store, the marketplace. Unity on the asset store, there's all kinds of fun stuff you can get, including terrain tools, which is kind of expands the ability of sculpting and everything. Unity, which is actually quite nice. It's not too bad. And so the trick is you can sculpt all day long by hand, and you're still going to have to look at a lot of photos and be very tedious about how you create terrain. Right now, we're just kind of flying through it, going as fast as we can, but um, that is something I'm going to spend some time doing. So I highly recommend actually trying to sculpt out detailed parts of terrain. So do a spur, do a draw, or do a cliff, and do like a round center section or the top of a hill or the top of a mountain. Do those pieces in detail and then save those as height maps or displacement maps and use them as alphas to make bigger terrain pieces. It's going to save you a ton of headache by the end of it. You can see here as you increase your resolution, it's actually going to become a little bit harder and harder to sculpt, even though it becomes more and more clear. That's why it becomes harder, because you have to take time to consider what you're doing. Now, real quick note here is I just started sculpting this, not thinking about it. You don't want to sculpt on X or Y. So what this does is it creates overhangs. I don't think I've created any yet, but let's use Sculpt Draw for this real quick. I was to accidentally sculpt on the side of this thing. It starts to create an overhang, and that's not going to work well for height maps, so keep that in mind. It might cause you some problems. Just in case I did, I'm going to go to Smooth Tool, and I got to turn the strength up because it's a little bit finer of a mesh here. As you increase resolution, Smooth Tool seems to require more strength. So it doesn't appear that I've created any there. Okay, so go ahead and lock X and Y. That's all you got to do. Now you should be good to go. We're going to work with this right here as well. So, Sculpt Draw Sharp. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Just going to kind of cut out hills and my ridges a little bit. Some things going. A lot of terrain does this number. Cuts and draws, or not cuts, but spurs and draws. come in and work those out, right? And you can create some really good results if you take the time to do it. It is tedious. It can take a little bit of time. Try to get through this as fast as possible. So, in my sculpting terrains video, somebody was asking in the comments section, how do you create tunnels and add roadways and all this other fun stuff inside Unreal Engine? And I can't say for sure in Unreal Engine. I haven't had a whole lot of time playing with Unreal Engine. Never been one of my favorite editors, but it's more than likely you're going to have to create or find someone that has created. So in Marketplace, you might be able to find roadway systems, spline systems. If you're doing modular kits, you might have to find a grid snapping system that works pretty well with that. I don't know for sure how well Real's default grid snap system works, but I imagine it works pretty well. Unreal's pretty nice for everything, I think, except when it comes to terrains. And just it has the bare essentials there, but it's never the most robust system. One of my favorite engines that I've used for a long time was Cryengine. It has plenty of terrain features, but they haven't been keeping it up to date, to be honest. Third-party stuff is probably the way to go, or terrain such as Gene. Or so keep that in mind. I find it's more enjoyable to sculpt my stuff though. And my projects, I'm usually not going for super realism, so there's nothing wrong with this kind of stuff. A little bit of an error or mistake, but if going for super high quality next generation type stuff, definitely might want to consider some of those third party apps for sure. Oh, not to mention a lot of AAA developers have their own in-house software that creates terrain procedural systems. So for example, Ubisoft spent like a year, maybe a year and a half, 2 years or something, just developing terrain system for Ghost Recon Wildlands. Turn the spacing down there because you can see it's getting these little stepping issues. Smooth. Hopefully it didn't do it in two. All right, so this feels very not natural right now. So I'm going to use clay strips again. Turn tip roundness down and make this really small. I'm not going to use radius here. I'll keep strength on. I'm going to try knocking in details that are pretty tiny here. Super fast anyway. Smaller than that. So I like to run out from the top, just kind of outwards sometimes. And I'll hold control and push in a little bit. Certain areas. Still not enough strength there. But you can use this on tops of ridges. Let's make it smaller. The detail is in how small you're willing to go. Because you can work this a lot. Still never quite matched the quality of satellite data that's been converted. Heightmap. So here it's not pushing it enough. Do a little bit more than it is right now. Just not quite there. I was hoping it had an option in there to make it a little bit stronger. Draw sharp could work, potentially. Or just regular sculpt draw might work really. But I'm gonna use alpha. This medium square one here. See what happens. Small. Oh, gotta set it to area plane. That quite a bit. Okay, so now I can get some real details going. I wanted to. Generally speaking, this is required. It's a little too strong, actually. Small. And I do want the radius back on for this one. It would be quite useful. So using different custom brushes can go a long way. Using photo scan data can also go down. We'll be here all day if I try to work this in this manner, but you can see we're getting some kind of result. So mesh filter, turn it to smooth, and I can actually start smoothing it out, right? Just by dragging, clicking and dragging there. Not too bad. So Sculptral was working. When things become too vertical, you're going to have a harder time sculpting on it. It's just the way it works. So you might want to move it out a bit, go back over it, try to work the details. Some game engines will use world space normal maps to create terrain so you can have overhangs and stuff. Pretty cool, but fortunately, we're doing right now, that's not technique work. I'm going to get a little crazy, see what happens, all right? Just so we can go a little bit faster here. And keep in mind when you're building any kind of environment, anything that saves you time is going to be your best friend, especially if you have a lot of things to do, like a lot of environments, a bunch of different maps, or you have a really big map. So if you're doing like an open world environment that's, multiple kilometers, you're going to want to have procedural tools that you can utilize. So back to Wildlands, talking about that, their system they generated allows them to place vegetation at different heights, et cetera, right? They could place boids or birds or animals at different locations. It has all kinds of really cool stuff on it. So there's a video of it on YouTube somewhere, and it like a GDC conference or something. They were talking about it. So it's really neat, kind of see what they did there. And also Bethesda, they're making the Fallouts there. They created a grid snapping system and a material swapper and all kinds of other fun stuff. So they could swap out their materials for their modular kits, snap their kits together easier, and manage them with just default editor tools, right? Kind of a custom solution anyway. At least that's what I saw in the video that they were doing as well, which you can find on YouTube somewhere. Watch it. Kind of pick apart what they do for their titles, and if it works for big studios, it probably works for you too. Odds are you're just an independent game developer, or you're doing kind of high school project or college project, or you're just getting into game development. Usually it takes teams to put things together. It takes a lot of work and a lot of effort. It's just a small one-man show. You're not going to get a whole lot done just by yourself. Might be able to do quite a bit, but to try and push the boundaries there and match some of these AAA titles, really going to be hard pressed to keep up with that kind of stuff by yourself usually. As more and better tools come out, though, I'm starting to question if that's always true. Tools out there are pretty awesome these days. might be something. Work smart and think about what you're doing. Get a lot done. Relatively short, quick amount of time. But it's always better to take a little extra time and figure out a good pipeline, with all the different tools you need, how things are going to work, and come up with the system to develop your art assets, because that's going to eat up most of your time. Art, programming on top of that. Now, I don't do any programming, just so you know. I'm not going to get into details on that kind of stuff because I will teach you how to write Hello World, and that's about it. Like beginner class 101. Not my, although there's times I've tried to write more and more, then I give up and try again, and give up, and go back and forth, right? So that's kind of the idea, anyways, behind everything is just to keep going at it. If you give it everything you got to. And so, game art in general, using Blender or Max or Maya, kind of new to it. It's really, it's pretty slow at first, but as you pick up speed, it starts to become a lot more fun. So keep that kind of thing in mind as well. It's a lot of experience goes a long way, especially when you think more about big picture kind of stuff, like whole projects instead of just one little task. Realize that like just creating terrain and spending all day sculpting it feels like a waste of time when you could probably buy satellite data, right? Just throw it into a game engine somewhere and then sculpt out the only pieces where the players will be. Save you a ton of time doing that. I think this is going to work quite well, actually, looking at it. Maybe a little bit too extravagant all over, too vain, but certainly isn't too bad either. So what a lot of guys will do is they'll add the details to the ridges and peaks and those things. Middle, they just kind of smooth that stuff down a little bit. That naturally happens if sediments are getting into the grooves there, right? So mud and dirt and all that stuff. See that in a lot of different game titles. Might flatten out certain sections. But you can smooth things back down, create some what looks like sediment, build up in certain areas, like finer gravels in those areas as well. You don't want to get rid of all your detail, but certain areas you get away with knocking things back quite a bit. This applies to textures as well. When you start texture painting this stuff, you can actually keep that in mind that sands and gravels might go in these creases. Tips here, you might have more rocky kind of terrain or texture. Let's take a good look at just terrains from around the world. See how they look. So we're going to shade this smooth. Make sure you shade it smooth. It's pretty important. It's pretty small right now. Probably could look better, to be honest, but for now we'll leave it. That'll be okay. We'll make it flatter in Engine. I'm going to press N, go to Grab Dock here, and click Setup Scene. Grab Dock's free. You can download it, install it. Not a big deal. There's a link in the description. And it's pretty much good to go out of the box right now. As you create more and more terrains, you might change some of these settings, but I'm going to export it to the desktop here. call this nothing. It's going to be height. It automatically puts a suffix on it that says height. Turn the compression down to 0 PNG 16-bit. Get rid of it. And I guess it went back to untitled, so we'll call this terrain. And it'll put the suffix height on it. So we do auto switch height preview here. Click OK. This is what it's going to generate. Okay. It's just doing a fancy camera render trick. The trick is in Unity and a lot of game engines, you need to have a little bit of depth here. So if you want to paint back downwards in it and create like a river or something by chance, I want to move it up. So we're going to move it up. Also, if you take a look under height here, there's a cap as well for the height. So click manual. See manually, the height is right here right now. We might want to bump that up. So I'm going to pull it above the terrain. This way we can, in editor, paint on the terrain and bring it up if we need. I'll show you how that caps out when we get there. I export this map right now, PNG 16-bit. Unreal Engine will read that just fine. For Unity, you have to go into Photoshop and save a PS or a raw file. So I'll open up the image, save a copy as raw. Okay, I'm going to copy on there, save it. You could use either or, IBM or Macintosh, it doesn't matter. Right now, I saved it. So normally, if everything was flat at 0, the background would be black, but because we raised it a little, it became gray. And white is gonna be our highest peaks, right? Nothing's pure white, nothing's pure black, so it's all in the middle. And generally speaking, that's probably what you want to do. We're going to do Unreal Engine first. It's actually a little bit more simple. So I'm going to create a new project. We're just going to do a blank scene here. Create basic scene, right? Just take a second for that to load up. I'm also going to start a new project here in Unity. So I'm going to click New, 3D Scene, not changing nothing else. Click and Create. Okay, Unreal has loaded. Drag it over. And it's really not too hard to import this at all. So what we're going to do is go to Modes, Landscape. You can see Import from File here. Click that. Now we're going to click this. Hit the PNG file. Okay, I'm going to say Fit to Data and change the material to just basic floor. Okay. The scale here is really large. All right. You could leave it like that if you want it like that, but I can change the scale on X and Y, make it a little bit smaller. And the height's kind of crazy as well. So let's change that down to 20. See what we end up. So right now that's looking pretty good. It's not too bad. I think it's a little too large still, so let's just do 20. I want to fly around it. Okay, better. Maybe that 20 was fine. Yeah, 20 is fine. And so fit the data. There we go. Import. Hopefully this works right. Sometimes it comes in, it doesn't work right the first time. And it appears it worked right, except it looks too large for me. So I'm going to Control Z back, change it to 10. Half that. There we go. We now have this terrain as well. If it looks faceted, all right, you might not have enough resolution on your sculpt. That's all it is. All there is to it. Or you might not have smooth shading on, and it might have rendered out the faceted look. So keep that in mind. Those two things could occur. But now we have a terrain inside of Unreal Engine. And if you are going to create a larger terrain, you might want to increase the resolution when you render it out as well. To me, this looks good. Not a big deal. Let's go over to Unity now since it loaded up. And this is also very easy. Game object, 3D object, create terrain. Terrain system is loaded. Okay, we're going to go to the tool settings here in the inspector. Make sure your terrain selected to get this. And just going to go ahead and click import raw here. And we're going to import the raw file. And you can see it's bit 16, 2048, Windows, terrain size 1000 by 1000. The middle here is Y, up and down. I'm going to change this to something like 120 to get started. And we should be okay. So I'm going to click import. You'll notice the Heightmap resolution changed from the original 513 to 2049. Not a big deal. Select terrain and you press F, you can kind of get around on it a little. So see, it came in looking pretty nice. Now, the little trick to this is that it's usually not a one-to-one match between Blender and the engine. Every different system that uses height maps, generally the height map data is a little bit different and it's imported in some way or shape or form. So this might be good for an initial lay-in, but I wouldn't take it back out and try to resculpt it back in Blender if you laid a bunch of objects out on this in the engine here. And also, it's not a good idea to lay objects out on this in Blender and then try to bring them into the game engine because it's not how the game engine is made to be used. It doesn't really work that way. So keep that in mind. You're you're trying to use a tool the wrong way, and it's not not going to work that well. Um, like I said, you do a mesh export of your terrain and then create LODs and do little terrain tiles and all kinds of other fun stuff. But the usually the terrain systems automatically LOD, so you get this tessellation thing going on. So that's a lot easier to deal with than trying to do that all manually. So just keep that in mind. All right. Oh, let's talk. I was going to show this one last thing, and then so we're going to do paint or raise and lower terrain. Brush size here is large. Let's do the soft one. And we're going to change the opacity. Yeah, pretty much maxed. Trick here is I wanted to paint up and not hit a cap too soon, so I can do that. But you can see I did, I guess it's not going to go to that area, huh? Because I did set the cap a little bit higher, I can sculpt up a little bit before it caps out, right? So that works. That's something that just happens in the Unity terrain system. I don't know if it happens in Unreal. I believe it happens in Cryengine as well, so keep that in mind. It may or may not. Cryengine. If I hold Shift, I can also go downwards, and you'll see that this is 0 in the Blender scene. So, and 0 also in Unity. But you can't sculpt below that. So that's why you want to raise up your terrain a little bit, because you might come in here and want to keep sculpting on it. If that's the case, and I suggest, or if it is, you're going to keep working this terrain in some way, then I would suggest going to Windows here, Package Manager, all right, and switching it over to Unity Registry. Go to this little gear icon. This is a big window. So big. Change it real quick. This little gear icon, Advanced Project Settings, and we are going to do enable preview packages, understand, agree to what they say, and then go down. There is something called Terrain Tools, which is really nice. Terrain Tools here, you can just click Install, and it's going to load it up. There's also sample assets you can use, so terrain materials and other fun stuff, and including like alphas you can use to sculpt. And it's going to say this right here, download asset samples from Asset Store. It'll take you to the website. You can download it. And once you download it, it's going to go into My Assets, right? And you'll see here, Terrain Tools Sample Asset Pack. Just import it. And that's pretty much it. I kind of show this off real quick. My opinion, it's probably best to, um, if you want photorealistic stuff, use terrain generators and stuff. It's really going to give you like a nice result. They've come a long way, and you do care about like gameplay a lot, and it's about where your characters are playing. You're going to want to manually sculpt a lot of those areas. So like distant terrain, it's just satellite data or terrain generators. But the play areas where you create your arenas and stuff is going to be, you're going to want to kind of focus in on that and do that manually perhaps. So that's why learning at least how to sculpt terrain and playing around with it and getting a little bit better at it can be pretty useful sometimes. Even that Ghost Recon terrain tool that they developed, it still has manual controls for sculpting and other stuff like that. So that's because you have to sometimes create cuts in terrain. Like a road might go through a canyon or something, and they blew it up with a bunch of dynamite so they can have a roadway go through there or railroad track. You might have to cut something like that. Right, so let's go ahead and check these out. You can see all the tools have changed. We now have different things we can use like erosion. There's hydraulic erosion and all this other fun stuff. Um, Also these alphas, which are real nice. So if I do raise or lower terrain, see I can press S to change scale, A to change height, and um, make this quite big or quite small. Now this is probably satellite data that was converted into a Heightmap that or it was just whatever the case. There's also D to rotate. So you can press D and you can kind of draw a little circle around it to rotate it. So these are, I think they're ridges for the most part. Could just be spurs, but it's hard to tell sometimes. But you can just click this stuff in there. So even if you lay out like a basic terrain, as long as you have some good alphas, whether it's in Blender or Unity, you can certainly click in that little bit of extra detail, get a nice result there going. Or you can create whole new things out in the distance, whatever with stuff too. I'll do it the opposite, just like that. See, my otherwise somewhat simple terrain became just a little bit more interesting that quick. Help of terrain tools there and some data. Not too bad. Now, of course, this video wasn't about painting the terrain or anything else, just getting one from Blender into the game engines. And that's all it was about. There's a lot more to talk about when it comes to environment art, and I'll make more videos about some of that into the future. But for now, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you learned a lot. Have a little bit of fun while sculpting, all right? And then see how it looks and plays when you get to run around on it in the game engine, all right? Take care. See you in the next one.